Hello, and welcome to Reformed Thinking. We're your hosts for the deep dive. Our aim here, as always, is to give you a shortcut to being well-informed. We take resources, break them down, and try to uncover the most, striking insights. For this deep dive, we're getting into a really fascinating, maybe even surprising, command from Jesus. We're looking at it through the lens of John Piper's interpretation. And this isn't just about, keeping your promises. It feels like it goes much deeper into the very fabric of truthfulness itself.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we're going to look closely at what Jesus actually says about taking oaths, primarily looking at Matthew chapter 5 and then later in Matthew 26. We're bringing in some related research notes that Piper draws on. Our goal today really is to unpack why. Why did Jesus give this instruction? What does it actually mean for genuine integrity in how we speak? And maybe how does it fundamentally shape how a follower of Jesus approaches truth, in every part of life? It's a topic that really touches the core of trust, doesn't it? Trust within community and how believers are supposed to live differently in the world.
Okay, so let's start there. We often talk about keeping promises, honoring your word. That's familiar ground. But before Jesus came along, what was the established understanding, the standard regarding oaths, especially thinking about the Old Testament context? What were people doing?
Well, the Old Testament definitely set a standard, and it was quite clear, quite demanding in its own way. People were absolutely expected to keep their oaths. This wasn't just, a suggestion. It was deeply ingrained, socially, even legally, to swear falsely, to break an oath that was a serious thing. It had real consequences. An oath was a recognized way, sometimes formal, sometimes even sacred, to basically guarantee what you were saying or promise a future action. It really was the common societal measure for reliability. It gave structure, helped people feel secure, in contracts, legal stuff, even personal promises. It was how society tried to build a baseline of trust.
Right, okay, so oaths were part of the system, a known tool to give words weight. But then Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, he introduces something that sounds, strikingly different. He seems to go beyond just saying, be honest. What exactly does he tell his followers in Matthew 5, verses 36 and 37?
Yeah, he gives a really clear, direct, and honestly revolutionary directive. He says, "And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black." Then he says, "Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil." This is a huge redirection, isn't it? Away from common practice, even away from how the Old Testament allowed oaths. Jesus moves beyond just keeping oaths to actively discouraging their use altogether. He specifically mentions swearing by your head, pointing out our inability to control even tiny things like hair color, to show how futile it is to use those things as guarantees. He's pointing his followers to something higher, a higher way of living, a higher standard of speech. It's a call for such transparency, such simplicity in our words, that in his view, oaths should become completely unnecessary.
Anything more than this comes from evil. Wow, that is a remarkably strong statement. It suggests this isn't just some minor tweak to morality. Why such a radical change now at this point in history? What makes Jesus' time, his era, so different that it needs this really firm directive against oaths, moving beyond just keep the oaths you make?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. And this new command is, it's intrinsically linked to the arrival of God's kingdom. That's the key. You see, with Jesus' ministry, the king himself is physically present. This isn't just a future hope anymore. God's direct rule is actively breaking into human history. It's changing the whole spiritual landscape. And then there's the sending of the Spirit of truth. That's God's own character, his truthfulness being poured out, residing within believers. And of course, the big one, the inauguration of the new covenant. Unlike the old covenant, which often relied heavily on external laws, rituals, this new covenant promised a transformation from the inside out. God's laws written on the heart. These aren't small adjustments. They are foundational spiritual realities. When you put them together, they change everything for those who are now part of God's kingdom. They bring a completely new spiritual atmosphere.
Okay, so if those are the new realities, the king is here, his spirit is inside believers, a new heart-transforming covenant is in place. What's the practical implication? How does that change how followers should actually speak? Does it fundamentally reshape how they interact with the world?
It absolutely elevates the standard of truthfulness, to an astonishing degree, actually. The expectation now is for a visible, noticeable lessening of compromise with evil in the world, a clear distinction from how things usually work. It's about this higher call to integrity, reflecting the new era that's dawned with Christ's rule. The simple word of a follower, just their yes or no, should be enough. Why? Because of this new spiritual reality, God's Spirit working within them. It's a direct consequence of being aligned with God's kingdom, living under his direct rule. There should be a real demonstrable difference in their lives, especially in how they speak truth and how others perceive them. Their yes should just mean yes, and their no, no, purely because of who they are now in Christ.
Right.
That makes sense.
Okay, let's shift slightly. Jesus says, anything more than this comes from evil. That's pretty stark. It suggests a problem deeper than just words or broken promises. Where exactly does this evil come from? The evil that seems to make oaths necessary in the first place. Feels like we're drilling down to a core human issue.
Yes, absolutely. The very fact that oaths exist, their origin, points to a foundational issue. Evil within the human heart, this inherent flaw, part of our fallen state, it naturally produces lying, deceit. It's just there. And Jesus himself spoke directly about this. He said lying and deceit originated with the father of lies. That's in John 8:44. He describes the devil as, well, a murderer and a liar right from the beginning, someone who stands completely outside of truth. And this evil that's inherently in the human heart, it gets amplified, it gains strength from the evil that's just pervasive in the world around us. So it's not just an external thing, it's internal too. A deep inclination that constantly works against truth, against integrity. It makes genuine trust really difficult. It's that constant struggle within human nature itself.
Okay, so if truth is always at risk because of this,
Yeah.
this deep-seated inclination towards falsehood, both inside us and around us, how does society even function? How do we build anything, maintain communities, even just manage daily interactions if truth is inherently fragile?
Yeah, you've hit on a really critical point there. Life in community absolutely requires some measure of trust, just to survive, let alone thrive. Without it, everything just grinds to a halt, doesn't it? Think about it. Marriage, business, schools, government, they all rely on some basic level of trust. And think about all the contracts, agreements we make. Buying a house, getting on a bus, they assume some truthfulness. And maybe most personally, our friendships. Trust is the absolute bedrock there. Because inherent truthfulness, sadly, often can't be reliably counted on in this fallen world. That's where devices like oaths came from. They became a practical, though, imperfect, way for society to keep functioning, to maintain some stability amidst all the potential for deceit. They're like a necessary workaround for a fundamental human problem.
Well, workarounds. That's
Yeah.
a good way to put it. You mentioned earlier that oaths arise from a deeper issue. Could you clarify what Piper means when he says oaths exist because love does not hold sway in the world? What's the direct link there?
Right. The core problem, the thing that really ruined trust in how people interact, the reason we can't just take a simple yes or no at face value all the time, is basically selfishness, ill will. When people are driven by those motives, getting what they want, they become prone to twisting the truth or just outright lying, even if it harms someone else. Just think. If genuine selfless love was the rule, if it universally prevailed, truth would naturally hold sway. People just wouldn't break their word. They wouldn't lie. Love would compel them to be reliable because someone driven by love has no desire to deceive or harm their neighbor. Their word would automatically be their bond because their heart would be aiming for the good of others, and that includes being honest.
But that's not the world we live in, is it? Love doesn't consistently win out in every interaction, not even close sometimes. So, in that reality, how do oaths step into that gap where genuine love is missing?
Exactly. Since love doesn't consistently hold sway, oaths arose as this pragmatic tool, a way to compensate for what love should naturally achieve. They're born out of the necessities created by that lack of universal love and trustworthiness. So to assure others, people found this way to essentially put themselves under threat of punishment, often divine punishment, if they broke their word. This mechanism basically makes a person's own self-regard, their concern for their own skin, their reputation, maybe fear of God, or just consequences makes that the measure of their truthfulness. They're motivated not necessarily by love for the other person or inherent honesty, but by wanting to avoid getting struck down or facing some other severe penalty. And what's really interesting is that this mechanism, this threat, it carries weight even for people who don't actually believe in God, because the social structure, the fear of consequences, it's still there. So it becomes this widely accepted, almost universal way to try and get assurance where genuine inherent love and truthfulness are lacking. It's an external lever trying to enforce an internal reality that's often missing.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So, oaths play this practical, maybe even crucial role in a fallen society, almost like a necessary evil, as you said. They act as a sort of stopgap measure, holding things together where genuine truthfulness might fail, but they don't actually fix the underlying problem.
You've got it. That captures it well. For people who don't yet know Jesus' saving work, oaths might still be a necessary tool. They can genuinely help a fallen society hang together. Piper uses this image, borrowing it from Adolf Schlatter, a German New Testament scholar known for his really rigorous work. He says oaths act as a kind of dam against the river of human falsehood. That image is powerful, isn't it? Just like a dam tries to hold back a potential flood, oaths try to contain this torrent of lies and deceit that flows from the human heart. They provide this structure of accountability. It's external, sure, but it can still prevent a complete societal collapse into just chaos and total distrust.
Yeah.
Without them, the flood of dishonesty might just overwhelm everything.
That dam image is really vivid, but the source material also hints that even this dam, it's not a perfect fix. It has its own built-in drawback if oaths are trying to make up for a lack of real truth. What's that downside? What's the unintended negative consequence?
Right. Schlatter points this out, and Piper picks up on it. While we try to build this dam against the flood of sin, it doesn't actually achieve the real goal, which is authentic internal truthfulness. In fact, in a subtle but really significant way, it only enlarges the influence of the lie. How? Because the very act of demanding or taking an oath implies that a simple yes or no isn't enough on its own. It kind of inadvertently reinforces the societal assumption that people can't be trusted at their word. By making oaths the standard for reliability, it highlights, maybe even normalizes, the absence of inherent truthfulness. So while oaths might contain the external expression of falsehood, they can't transform the heart that wants to lie. They actually end up emphasizing the lack of intrinsic reliability rather than cultivating it. They point to the problem, but they don't solve it inside the person.
Okay, that's a crucial distinction. So Jesus's command to his followers is incredibly demanding then, a really high standard for speech and truth. Which brings up the obvious question. Did he himself live up to this? How did his own life reflect this, well, revolutionary expectation he set?
Absolutely. And this is key. Jesus' command isn't just some abstract moral idea he threw out there. It's a call to a different level of truthfulness.
Yeah.
It's meant to be a compelling witness to the kind of deep intrinsic integrity he himself brought into the world. He expects his followers' simple yes and no to be literally as good as an oath, reflecting complete, faultless integrity that mirrors his own. And he didn't just preach this, he lived it perfectly. Consistently. His whole life was the illustration of what he taught. His words and his character were in perfect sync.
That's a powerful claim. Can you give us a really concrete example from his life, a moment where we see his simple word carrying that ultimate weight, even under immense pressure?
Certainly. Think about his trial before the high priest. It's in Matthew 26, verses 63 and 64. The high priest doesn't just casually ask Jesus a question. The text says he adjured him by the living God. He commanded him to state directly if he was the Christ, the Son of God. Now, to adjure someone in that context, that was a deeply serious, formal, almost legal act. It was essentially putting someone under the most solemn oath imaginable, compelling them to speak the truth as if God himself was the direct witness. It carried the absolute weight of societal and religious expectation for such a huge declaration. It was like a spiritual subpoena, demanding a definitive answer, basically on pain of divine judgment. The pressure on Jesus in that moment was unbelievable, to just conform to how things were done.
Wow. Okay, so faced with that intense pressure, that formal adjuration, how did Jesus respond? Did he give in to the expectation and take the oath, or did he stick to the principle he himself taught?
He absolutely would not yield to taking an oath, even under those incredibly grave circumstances. Instead, his response was simply, "You have said so." That was his simple yes. You have said it, and you are right. That's how Piper puts it. There was no need for an extra oath. No external divine guarantee was required. His simple word by itself carried the full, unyielding impact of absolute truth. And Caiaphas, the high priest, he felt the full force of it. He immediately understood Jesus' simple declaration was the claim to divinity, a claim that in his eyes was blasphemy. Recognizing the directness of it, he tore his robe, the traditional sign of outrage at blasphemy, without needing to push Jesus further, without needing an oath. It's just profound demonstration of Jesus' unimpeachable integrity. His simple word held supreme authority. It conveyed unequivocal truth. His truthfulness was just self-evident.
Okay, but this brings up something that, well, it might look like a contradiction at first glance. If Jesus commanded just a simple yes or no, why did he himself often use phrases like, "Truly I say to you," or "Truly, truly I say to you"? Sometimes you see it as "verily, verily." No. The sources say he used these over 50 times. Wouldn't that seem like more than yes or no? How do we square that?
That's a really perceptive observation, and it's crucial for getting the spirit of what Jesus was teaching, not just the letter. The scholar D.A. Carson, he explains that Jesus used truly, or truly, truly, the Greek word is amen, actually, used at the beginning of a sentence, which was unusual. He used it before an utterance to confirm and make plain its trustworthiness and what it conveyed. So it wasn't about adding extra words because his own word lacked something, Quite the opposite. It was more about ensuring the listener fully grasped the immense weight, the absolute certainty, the divine authority of what he was about to say. You could think of it like a signal, maybe a divine amplifier, for truths that his listeners might otherwise struggle to really comprehend or receive fully.
Okay, so he wasn't using these reinforcing words because he lacked integrity himself, or maybe because his listeners didn't trust him. What was the deeper reason, the motivation for using them so often?
No, absolutely the opposite. If anyone ever existed whose integrity was so perfect it needed no extra words, it was Jesus. His use of these phrases, Piper argues, came purely from an impulse of love. Love for his audience. His listeners, remember, they were living in a world soaked in deceit, skepticism. They needed to be awakened to the complete trustworthiness of what he was saying. They might not have fully known or maybe couldn't perceive just how utterly reliable the speaker Jesus himself truly was, or the incredible divine nature of the truth he was revealing. So these reinforcing words were entirely for their benefit, to help them receive the full impact of his divine truth, to bolster their faith in what he was revealing, not to make up for any lack in his own character or reliability. He was helping them see the reality of his words more clearly.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. And does God himself, who is truth, who is integrity itself, does he ever use anything like an oath to confirm his word to us? Does the divine example shed any more light here?
Yes, it does. The sources point out that God himself, who is perfect truth, the very definition of integrity, sometimes confirms his word with oaths. We see examples in, say, Luke 1.73, referencing the oath to Abraham, or Genesis 22.16, where God swears by himself. Now, this obviously wasn't because God was untrustworthy. That's just impossible to imagine. Rather, Piper suggests it was to give multiple encouragements to help us believe him.
Okay.
It's an act of what theologians call divine condescension. God essentially stoops down to our level, meets us in our human weakness, our doubt. He uses a form of assurance we understand to bolster our faith, to give us absolute certainty in his promises. It's really a measure of his grace towards us, his creatures who often find it hard to just simply believe his word.
So what does all this Jesus's example, God's example, tell us about Jesus's command regarding the specific wording? Does it mean the rule is maybe less absolute than it first sounded, or is there a deeper principle here beyond just sticking rigidly to yes or no?
Yeah, I think it leads us to understand that Jesus' core instruction aims for absolute integrity, unshakable truthfulness of the heart. But it doesn't seem to rigidly control the precise, exact wording that expresses this truthfulness in every single situation. The really critical message here seems to be that the principle of absolute truth, integrity of heart, that's the primary concern. It's not about a legalistic adherence to only saying yes or no and nothing else, ever. The spirit of the command is about the heart's disposition towards truth, a deep-seated commitment to honesty in everything. It's not just about policing vocabulary. Our lives, and especially our speech, should consistently point to a character rooted in truth, just like Christ's own character was.
Okay, that clarifies things quite a bit. So, given all this discussion, Jesus' strong command against oaths, his own example, even God's occasional use of them, are there ever situations where a follower of Jesus might actually be permitted to take an oath? It seems like such a strict command initially, but then we see these nuances, these divine examples. How do we navigate that?
Well, the sources do suggest some very limited exceptions, recognizing that we live in a complex, fallen world. Piper concludes that the specific wording of an oath, saying something like, I call God to witness that what I say is true, could potentially, under certain specific circumstances, actually be a way to show love. When would that apply? Maybe when you're speaking to someone who doesn't know you at all, they have no basis to judge if you're trustworthy, and maybe their cultural situation or perhaps a legal framework they're in would only give real weight to what you're saying if you use such a formal declaration. The motivation here would need to be about removing a barrier, allowing the truth to be communicated effectively to them. It's about meeting them where they are, essentially, so the truth can get through.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this right, the reason behind potentially using an oath matters way more than just the act itself. It's about the motive, love, clarity, and the specific needs of the listener rather than a total blanket ban.
Precisely, yeah. This potential limited use of an oath, it's understood in relation to the abuses of oaths that Jesus was primarily hitting on, the casual, self-serving, manipulative oaths. He condemned back in Matthew 5 and Matthew 23. Those were about people trying to find loopholes or trying to control others. The guiding principle, the one that applies across all time, all cultures for followers of Jesus, is simply to be people of absolute truthfulness, absolute honesty in every situation. The specific wording, the formality of the speech, that's secondary to that core intrinsic integrity. The emphasis is always on the heart's unwavering orientation towards truth and the desire to communicate that truth clearly, effectively. Even if Very occasionally, it means using a cultural form to do so, as long as it's not a deceitful form itself.
Right. But even with those carefully worded potential exceptions, there's a definite sense of caution, almost an unease, that comes through in the source material about even discussing permitted oaths. What's that about? Why the hesitation?
Yeah, the author, Piper, notes that even just talking about permitted oaths carries a risk, the risk of taking the edge off. Jesus' really radical request. Jesus wasn't just trying to clean up some bad habits around oath-taking. He was actively raising his followers to a significantly higher standard of integrity, higher than just keeping promises or swearing correctly. There's a very strong pull away from oaths as a general practice for his people. So the concern is if these exceptions become too broad or maybe too easily embraced, then the unique countercultural nature of Jesus' original command might get watered down. It might get lost. We could unintentionally just slide back towards the world standard instead of embodying Christ's higher call.
Okay, so what should be the consistent default position, the gut inclination for a follower of Jesus in daily life when the idea of an oath comes up?
The new consistent inclination, the default setting for a follower of Jesus, should always be something like, my oath isn't necessary here. I should be really slow to use one. The concern, as Piper highlights it, is that willingly using an oath, especially in a situation where your simple word really ought to be enough, could subtly communicate something negative. It might imply a weakness in your own trustworthiness. It could suggest, even unintentionally, that your unadorned word isn't sufficient on its own. And that might, in a subtle way, actually dishonor Jesus by diminishing the reflection of his perfect integrity in your life. The goal is really to live in such a way that an oath becomes redundant, like a relic from a time before the king truly established his kingdom in your heart and life.
That makes sense. And what does Jesus free us from in this whole area, both in how we speak and maybe our internal state? What's the remarkable freedom being offered here?
Well, this is a really significant aspect of Jesus' freeing work. He frees his followers from two things that are deeply intertwined. First, he frees us from the need to lie. Why? Because our hearts are being renewed. Our deepest desires are shifting towards truth as we follow him. And second, remarkably, he frees us from the need to prove that we do not lie. Because ideally, our lives, our character, become a visible testimony to our integrity. This is a profound freedom offered in Christ. It's liberation from that heavy burden of deceit and also from the anxiety of constantly feeling like you have to validate your truthfulness with external guarantees like oaths. It means living with a kind of quiet confidence that your character, shaped by Christ, speaks louder than any sworn statement ever could.
Okay, so wrapping this section up, for followers of Jesus, the goal isn't merely to scrupulously avoid telling lies, it's much bigger. It's about cultivating such a deep intrinsic integrity in their lives that those external assurances, like oaths, they just become irrelevant. It's a pursuit of profound, heart-level honesty.
Exactly. That's it. Followers of Jesus are called not just to be honest in, specific actions or words, but to actively move toward a condition, a state of being, where protections against being thought dishonest will not be necessary.
Yeah.
This points to that continuous growth in spiritual maturity, in intrinsic integrity, reflecting Christ more and more in every part of who we are. It's about cultivating a character that just naturally radiates truth, making oaths totally superfluous because one's word is, just by its very nature, a reliable reflection of Christ's own character living within them. It's that ongoing work of sanctification, really.
And what does this kind of truthfulness, this radical integrity in speech, what does it declare about Christ's reign in a believer's life? How does it visibly show his lordship?
Well, Piper says they are to find countercultural ways of declaring the lordship of Christ over their minds and mouths. Think about it. In a world where trust is often fragile, where oaths are common practice, their simple yes and no, when it's consistently backed up by a life of integrity, that should speak volumes. It should distinguish them sharply from the world's reliance on external guarantees. It's sort of ingrained skepticism. It visibly demonstrates that Christ truly rules within them, that he influences even the simplest of their words, shaping their character to look more like his own. Their speech itself becomes, in a way, a living sermon.
So what's the ultimate aim then, the big picture for this deep dive into truthfulness? What's the overarching aspiration behind Jesus' instruction on oaths and his call to simple truth?
Ultimately, Jesus intends to be known as the way, the truth, and the life. That's who he is. And he commands his followers to live and speak in a way that consistently makes his glory known to a world that desperately needs that truth. So, Our truthfulness, our integrity, it becomes more than just personal morality. It becomes a witness to who he is and to the incredible transformative work he does in changing hearts and lives. Our integrity doesn't just uphold some abstract code, it points others directly to the source of all truth, to the King who has brought his kingdom near and invites everyone to walk in integrity with him.
Wow. That's quite a high calling. What a rich exploration of what it means to be truly truthful. We've seen how Jesus calls his followers to this standard of integrity where, ideally, a simple yes or no carries full weight, how it reflects the reality of the kingdom of God breaking in, the reality of the new covenant he established. And it's clear this isn't just about following a set of rules for speaking, is it? It's about displaying the very character of Christ in our speech, flowing from our lives.
That's absolutely right, yeah. It really challenges us, doesn't it? To look at our own hearts, to recognize that oaths historically arose because love failed, because evil is pervasive. But the good news is that in Christ we're freed from the need to lie. And remarkably, freed from the constant need to prove we're not lying. We're called instead to embody this distinct countercultural truthfulness, one that points directly back to Jesus, his perfect character, and his liberating work in us.
So as you, our listener, reflect on all this, maybe consider this question. How does living with that kind of radical integrity, where your simple word genuinely aims to be as good as an oath, how does that actually alter how you interact, especially in a world that still relies so heavily on oaths, contracts, external guarantees? How can your simple, reliable word itself speak volumes about the truth you embody because of Christ's ongoing work in you? Something to think about.
May your yes truly mean yes and your no truly mean no, all for the glory of Christ.